Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. We are here on a Friday. We are wrapping up with the top 7 quarterback rooms in the AFC. But first, we're going to talk a little news and a little schedule. Dennis, I know you were waiting with bated breath when the NFL schedule was dropped. How many hours have you spent analyzing the NFL schedule so far?
The NFL schedule dropped?
So the schedule is officially out. Probably the greatest thing that you would notice if your team has finished a rookie draft is week 1 projections have started to drop, which is always kind of a little bit of fun for fantasy. There are a couple of interesting things. Minnesota gets the rare back-to-back international games in different countries. Their second game's in London. I think their first game was in Spain.
I thought it was in like Ireland. I didn't think it was like.
I don't think they're the Ireland game. I thought that was Pittsburgh was the Ireland. Oh, maybe it's both of them. Let me look. But the back-to-back in different countries, that's got to be a little bit difficult. Oh, you're right. It is Ireland and then England. So they're against the Steelers in Ireland on September 28th, and then against the Browns in England on October 5th. The only good part for them is they shouldn't. Neither of them will be their home game, but I think they're technically considered the visiting team for both of those, but that feels like kind of a tough draw.
So is it as tough as, say, the Rams playing 1 week against the Giants in New York and then the next week against the Dolphins in Miami?
I think so, because those are much more
aren't Ireland
time
changes. England like in the same time zone, so there isn't even a time zone change? Like they're on the same island, right?
So are they just going to stay out there for 2 weeks? And where do they have to practice? And
they can practice at Wembley. Why not? I mean, I would assume they're staying. It would make zero sense to fly all the way back across the ocean. To me, this feels like
you're talking about a lot of people that have families and other obligations that aren't going to want to be out of the country for 2 weeks.
You know, it's the football season. You're gone 9 weeks anyways, plus training. I get it. You know, would you rather sleep in your own bed? Sure. But I don't think it's any worse than playing 2 road games in different time zones in back-to-back weeks.
I mean, that is a pretty substantive change. Minnesota, it would be on Central Time. London is 5 hours ahead of East Coast, so you're talking 6 hours apart. There isn't a guarantee that London and Ireland are in the same time zone either, given the way time zones go. We'd have to look and see if they're in the same. I mean, they've done the back-to-back to the Jaguars, who signed up for it themselves, and they usually stay in the same town and the same stadium for both of the weeks. Doing 2 different countries in 2 different weeks feels a little.
Ireland and the United Kingdom is same time zone.
Uh, I mean,
And oddly
I
enough, Portugal's in that time zone too.
you know. The other thing I thought was interesting, these Monday night doubleheaders, I feel like we're getting more and more every year. This year they now have 4 Monday night doubleheaders. Week 2, week 4, week 6, and week 7.
I thought you were going to say week 8 so I could hit you with a who do we appreciate.
No, week 8 is Washington at Kansas City. They probably don't want to split the audience. But ABC, when they announced their fall schedule this year, basically has gone back to putting Monday Night Football as an ABC series, and I think that's part of why they're doing so many doubleheaders, because they'll drop them on both games and they'll use ESPN Plus. But that is quite a fair number of doubleheaders. I also noticed, for those of us that try to keep up with the games and for fantasy scoring, they've gone back to a couple of these doubleheaders, week 2 and week 7, being the 10 p.m. Eastern kickoff for the second game. So they are true doubleheaders, 5 p.m. Eastern for the first half, 10 p.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern for the first half, 10 p.m. Eastern for the second half.
So if you're starting 2 games an hour apart, that's not a doubleheader. That's 2 games on the same day at basically the same time. A doubleheader is you play one, and then after it, there's another one. As a long-time baseball fan, I am going to stand on that. 2 games at basically the same time, not a doubleheader. Like, you don't eat dinner.
No, you're thinking about a doubleheader for when teams are playing a doubleheader, as in playing 2 games. But frequently there have been doubleheaders in coverage that are not that far apart, because you're just talking about a network having the rights to 2 games of the same sport.
If they're basically on at the same time, it's not a doubleheader. Like for it to be a doubleheader, there should not be any more than an expected 30-minute overlap. I decree.
I mean, that can be your personal opinion, but
it's not an opinion.
It is an opinion.
That's real. It's not a doubleheader if the games are on at basically the same time.
I mean, that's how they've done sports doubleheaders in many different sports over many decades.
They're not doubleheaders, though. That's like saying, hey, I ate 2 lunches because I had one at 8 and one at 11. No, you didn't. You had breakfast and then you had lunch.
Or if you're a hobbit, you had second breakfast.
But it's not a doubleheader.
I'm trying to see if they have week 14 buys again. I actually never looked at bye weeks. I wonder how they do again have week 14 buys, but this year the teams that are on bye in week 14, the Carolina Panthers, San Francisco 49ers, New York Giants, and New England Patriots. So maybe a little less fantasy robust, but week 14 is again the final week of bye weeks. Bye weeks start in week 5. So they are stretching them out. Week 13 is Thanksgiving week. So there is no bye weeks. Last year they had kind of a random week. I think it was like week 8 where there were no byes. That's not the case this week. I'm trying to see if there are any weeks like that. Did you look at your own team schedule? Any?
Nope.
You just want it to be a mystery?
No, it still seems so far away to worry about schedules. I'm still trying to finish up rookie drafts. I got a reset draft that's in the 34th round that that seems to have it just has gotten slow these last 6 rounds. It's been dragging on. And I'm just kind of focused there and trying to get through the school year with my kid and get my mom moved down to my brother's. And so I've just, I don't know. It's the schedule. It's so far away.
So for fantasy purposes, bye weeks start week 5. Week 13, there are no buys because it's Thanksgiving week, but they end week 14. Week 13, the only week with no buys. And I only clocked 1 week with 6 teams on a bye, so maybe there won't be as many wells of sadness. Although week 14, probably either the last week of your regular season or the first week of the playoffs, having 4 teams out on a bye is not great. If the 4 teams they picked could be worse. San Francisco has some pretty solid fantasy assets. You might be starting Drake May in Superflex leagues. Who knows who's going to be playing for the Giants? You'll lose Malik Neighbors. Carolina has a couple of interesting players, but that doesn't seem quite as bad. Wasn't that week 14 last year was like 4 of the best? I feel like it was
Washington and Indianapolis and
Denver was out. Cincinnati was out, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, not quite as well. A couple of extensions handed out. The Ravens gave Derrick Henry a 2-year extension. They are hoping to see him retire as a Raven, is what I saw. So that should be 2 years added on to the second year of his 2-year deal, which is this year. So up to 3 more years. And Brock Purdy getting a 5-year extension, finally extension eligible, keeps him tied to the 49ers for a good long time. His $265 million, which, they had to release a lot of players this offseason, shift some things around, so you knew it was coming. But I don't think that's quite as, I guess that does exceed $50 million per year.
53 million, I think.
Yeah, so pretty high. But what do you think of those 2 extensions?
I feel like they should have made the extension longer for Henry if they want him to retire a Raven, because he's just different.
He's already 31, though.
Yeah, I get it.
So 3 more years, 34 for a running back. Are you really going to pay them $15 million a year?
Yeah, I maybe not $15 million a year for 4 years. Maybe you drop it down to 12, whatnot. But he's
also got that weird January birthday, so he'll turn 32 on the last day of the regular season. So this would really take him until he turns 35. That is getting up there for that style of running back, or any running back, really.
But we've been saying that many carries now. It just, I get it. It's going to catch up with him. It will. And it's got to, right? But it just feels like he's just rolling along, and he's in an offense that is tailor-made to what he does now, and it just feels like he's never going to stop.
Well, they can certainly give him another extension. I'm just saying I'm not so surprised that you wouldn't, because you're talking about 3 more years. What can happen in 3 years?
I know. I'm being semi-facetious with that, but no. And
at least they know they're thinking of him as a guy they'd like to see end his career with them.
Yeah,
instead of a guy who they're going to end his career because he came there, which is what happens to veteran wide receivers that sign with the Ravens.
Right. No, I'd like to see. I wouldn't mind seeing him go get a Super Bowl. They've got one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and John Harbaugh has done a fantastic job there.
If he goes to another team, I hope he does win a Super Bowl.
Yeah. Then, Brock Purdy, there's you hear talk about, he's a system guy or whatnot, but maybe he is, maybe he's not, but I think being a system guy gets sort of overran. Every offensive coordinator has a system. And so some are just better than others, and sometimes the fit is better. Purdy, I think, has handled himself well coming out as, basically one pick from being in the UDFA. with he lost Ayuk last year. Debo hasn't played great. McCaffrey wasn't there. He was a QB1 in 9 out of 15 games last year. And I think 9 out of 16 games the year before that, he was a QB1. So I think he's an underrated runner, and he's got plus mobility. He's a quick decision maker. I think Brock Purdy kind of changed the way I look at rookie quarterbacks, and the Dynasty Nerds kind of study they put out about quarterbacks playing in 35 games in college really portends well for them to be successful in the NFL. That's why I'm curious to see what happens with Dylan Gabriel, who played 64 college games. Shadir Sanders started for 4 years in college. So they've got two guys that, based on how this narrative is shaping up, could both be pretty good pros. Kind of out of nowhere. Bo Nix, so many people thought he was overdrafted, but he played in, 55, 56 college games. He started a lot of games in college. There's no substitute for live reps. And I think we see it with, the Trubiskys and the Richardsons and the Achilles Smiths and a lot of these guys that come in from college that don't have they just haven't had enough live fire, and they've been protected by their college quarterback system. I saw a blurb on Roto World that said if everything goes perfect for the Giants this year, Jackson Dart doesn't see the field. In part because of the offense he played in college isn't necessarily conducive to being a pro quarterback. And so they want Dable to be able to work with him all year, for him to sit behind Russ and Jameis and DeVito, and then take over next year, a la Patrick Mahomes. So we'll see what happens with him. But no, I'm happy for Purdy. We're hearing lots of positive things about Christian McCaffrey. And if McCaffrey is good, that's a good thing. He's a really, really good running back. But I think that he's missed, 30 games over the last 4 seasons. And then he came off a couple years, and previous to that, then he missed 17 games over 2 seasons. So I get that McCaffrey may be back, and that's going to make a ton of difference. They've got Juwan Jennings. Brandon Ayuk is coming back. They got George Kittle, who just signed an extension this offseason. So I think Purdy is set up for success. Hopefully Trent Williams stays healthy all year. They have drafted a couple offensive linemen, not super high, but, I don't think they drafted any first-round picks the last couple of years, but they do need to kind of start to look towards the future on that O-line as well.
So now, highest paid quarterbacks per year. Dak's number one, $60 million per year average for Dallas. Then Josh Allen, 55. Joe Burrow at 55. Trevor Lawrence and Jordan Love at 55, both ahead of Brock Purdy. I think I would take Brock Purdy over Trevor Lawrence. Probably a toss-up for me, Jordan Love. And then Tua is just ahead of Brock Purdy as well. I think I'd feel better about Brock Purdy. So the 49ers didn't get too bad of a deal considering the landscape that's out there and what other teams have had to pay to commit to. For a guy who's 23-13 as a starter, 4-2 in the playoffs. You compare that to Trevor Lawrence, 22-38, 1-1 in the playoffs. Jordan Love, 18-15, 1-2 in the playoffs. Tua, 38-24, but 0-1 in the playoffs. Only made it one time. So seems like a pretty on par deal there for 49ers.
Yeah.
We are going to finish with the top 7 quarterback rooms in the AFC. We did the first 9 actually on Monday when we were talking about it. So you and I, it looks like we not only have the same 7 teams, we have them in about the same order. So number 7 coming in, the Houston Texans on their roster, C.J. Stroud, Davis Mills, and then they drafted Graham Mertz, and they have Keaton Slovis, who was a college free agent last year. Not sure all of them will make the final roster. Stroud and Mills feel like they are pretty solid top 2. You know, I thought Stroud had a great rookie year, struggled a little bit in year 2. Davis Mills has been a very solid number 2 and was a solid spot starter before they picked up C.J. Stroud. So I thought that was a pretty good battery. In years past, they've had kind of a veteran number 3. They had Case Keenum for a couple of years. He moved on. I think you and I have still wondered about their protection scheme, but what do you like about this room?
Well, I'm obviously a big C.J. Stroud fan. And Davis Mills, when he came out, he was not much was expected from him. And he ended up becoming the starter. And I think he played pretty composed ball. Him being the backup, you know, I'm sure he wants to find a spot where he can start, but I think he's going to be perceived as a backup for pretty much the rest of his career. He may work his way back into a starting role somewhere if he leaves Houston, but it feels to me like Davis Mills is Gary Kubiak to C.J. Stroud's John Elway. And if he was smart, he would kind of ride that for as long as he can. Sometimes you got to overpay your backup a little bit if you feel comfortable with them and you know they can step in. A lot of last year's trouble for Stroud was because the offensive line was just really bad. For a bunch of guys that had some pretty good draft capital and stuff, you know, and who had performed well the year before, last year they just kind of fell apart. And so they let guys walk, they traded guys away, and they pretty much have worked to revamp that offensive line. Let's see what happens. They got a solid running back in Joe Mixon. Graham Mertz, decent college career. The last 2 seasons, he's completed 73 or higher percent of his passes at Florida. Previous to that, he started for 2.5 years at Wisconsin. So he's been around. He played 50 college games, 6'3", 227. He's another guy that could develop into a good career type backup. Keaton Slovis, there was a while in college where he was kind of a hot name, and then he kind of bounced around, left USC, played a couple other places, I think, and just sort of never really reached any potential after his first year, I think, at USC. So they've got a couple guys. I like C.J. Stroud a lot. Underrated athlete, but as he continues to not use his athleticism, it will continue to be a non-factor, and he just doesn't look to run. Nico Collins, strong wide receiver. They brought in Christian Kirk. Dalton Schultz at tight end is solid. Joe Mixon at running back. So I feel like they're set up for Stroud to continue to be in that sort of 10 to 15 QB range, unless he goes on a touchdown spree. If he amps up his touchdown passes, he could get inside the top 10 probably.
And Slovis went to Pitt following USC, and then 2023 finished at BYU. And you're right, his stats kind of declined in Pitt. Didn't even hit 60% completion, which is far lower than anything he had done at USC. 2,400 yards, 10 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. BYU, 57.5% completion percentage, only 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So it's probably why his his draft stock slid down a little bit. Davis Mills is. I went and looked because I couldn't remember. He signed a 1-year deal this offseason after his rookie contract expired. I didn't think he was too bad as a starter. We wondered if he got much of a fair shake or a look, and he looked pretty good considering the dumpster fire around him when they were doing a different coach every year. But I still think I think we thought he was probably more of a career backup coming in, and I think he's found a place where he's comfortable being the backup and would be ready if called upon. I think that probably is the best fit for him. And, he's been with the Texans his whole career. So, a little comfortability there. The number 6 team for us is the Denver Broncos. On the roster for them, Bo Nix going into year 2, Jarrett Stidham, the veteran backup, and this year they picked up Sam Ellinger to be their third kind of development guy. Nix, I thought, was probably the second best of the rookie quarterbacks last year. He certainly pushed Jaden Daniels down the stretch when they were looking at Rookie of the Year consideration. I think Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas were in that conversation as well, and Brock Bowers, kind of the biggest standout rookies. He definitely did a lot better than I was expecting. He seemed to get stronger as the season went along. So took Denver to the playoffs for the first time in 9 years. Stidham has been a quality backup for the last couple of years for the Broncos, was with the Raiders for a year before that, then New England prior to that. Ellinger going to be kind of interesting. He's been one of those young players that kind of rotated through the Colts QB dumpster fire over the last decade since they lost Andrew Luck. I think he's gone out there a few times. I really don't know what to make of that. But I like Denver's top 2 battery and seems to fit what Sean Payton wants to do.
Sam Ellinger is just Riley Leonard. Good athlete, terrible arm. He's going into year 4. I think he's past the stage of being a developmental quarterback. He's more of a hanging on to QB4 slot type of quarterback. He's at that. He's been around the league for long enough now that a team knows what they're going to get with him. If you have to play him, it's not looking good. I thought Stidham. His first shot that he got there in Denver, I thought he looked pretty decent and that he might get a shot to try to hold the job. And then they went out and drafted Nix. And I don't want to say they gifted the job to Nix. I know he worked hard and he earned it.
He was a far better quarterback in preseason. It was an open competition last year between all 3, and they rotated those guys. All 3 of them started, including Zach Wilson. And Stidham was fine, but did not look like he was their number 1 quarterback.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he was given the shot, and you either step up and you make it or you don't, and he didn't. And Nix, that game pressure that he had playing at Oregon, and the adversity he faced at Auburn and leaving there and starting or playing 55 games in college, he had something going for him. He had, there's people that have it, and you often can't describe what it is. Right now, it seems like Bo Nix has it, and Sean Payton saw it. That's why I think there were a lot of people that didn't expect Nix to be a first-round pick, let alone the 12th pick of the first round. Or was he? Yeah.
This is the 12th pick of the first round.
And, but then he came in and he just did everything he needed to do. There were, the metrics around what he did at Oregon with so many passes at or behind the line of scrimmage and stuff. And, it's easy to get wrapped up in some of those analytics and forget, well, what are they actually asking him to do? Well, that's what Oregon was asking him to do, and he did it very well. And when he had to go down the field, he was successful at that. But because of seeing so much at the line of scrimmage stuff, it was easy for guys like me that are not really talent evaluators that just play fantasy and try to gather, metrics and watch film and develop an opinion. And, sometimes we hit, sometimes we don't. I'm happy for you as a Denver Bronco fan. And I like Nix as a player. He's what did he have? Like 450 rushing yards last year, 500. He's quite mobile. I remember seeing that when he was at Auburn.
Yeah, let me look. He had 430 rushing yards on 4 rushing touchdowns, 29 passing touchdowns, 37.75 in yardage, and so
I mean, great connection with Cortland Sutton, who's like one of my longtime crushes in the NFL. It'll be interesting to see, does RJ Harvey dominate the running back position? Will Jaleel McLaughlin hold on to some? Does Audric Estime take a second year leap and kind of become that big hammerback a la, who were the guys that Mark Ingram, and who was the other guy Peyton had that was a big back in that he paired up? Anyways, doesn't matter. But Peyton was one of the early guys that liked the big back, receiving back kind of duo. Will Estime be able to kind of earn that role, or is Harvey going to be able to kind of dominate the touches?
Yeah, it should be. It'll be interesting to see. Our number 5, we're still in the AFC West, and that is the Los Angeles Chargers on their depth chart. Justin Herbert in as a starter. They have backup Taylor Heineke, who has been a solid backup, started games for both the Commanders and the Atlanta Falcons before coming to the Chargers. But then they picked up a couple of interesting guys for the back end. Trey Lance coming and signing a free agent deal to work with Jim Harbaugh. I find that kind of interesting. And they signed college free agent DJ Ugalele. A guy who struggled at times in college, took a precipitous drop after being the hot thing early in his college career. Trey Lance, great draft capital, never really managed to develop anything with San Francisco. Seemed like he struggled still when he was with Dallas, but I think it's a more interesting fit with Harbaugh. I'll be curious to see what they do with that scheme. But for me, Herbert, a solid veteran quarterback we like both for Dynasty and for the real NFL, and Taylor Heineke, a very solid professional backup.
Yeah, this room is built on the top 2. I think Herbert is, big arm, accurate, good mobility. Heineke can come in a pinch and get some stuff done. He does tend to explode after a few games, so that gets a little wild. So you don't want him to, ideally you want Heineke to start like 2 games and then Herbert be back. I'm not sure DJ Ugalele makes the team.
Yeah. I doubt they keep 4, but maybe on the practice
squad. I'm not
squad.
even sure Trey Lance makes the team, to be honest.
They're probably practice squad. Well, the interesting thing now, too, is you can carry your third quarterback on the practice squad, and they are a game day active as that emergency quarterback. It's really changed, I think, how teams have to think about processing.
But I don't know that Lance is good enough to be that guy. Muted.
I think they'll keep him as their emergency quarterback.
Yeah, I don't know that what makes us think that he's good enough to be that guy. I'd much rather have who were we just talking about? Who's the third guy in Houston? No, that's Graham Mertz.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've given up on Lance. I don't think there's anything there. I don't think there's, I mean, for me, Trey Lance needs to go to the UFL where he can actually play and get snaps and play, because he's not getting it in the NFL. And it's what now, he's going into year 4 or 5 now. And
It
it's,
would be 5 because they declined his 5th-year option last year.
and so like, I get, to me right now, Trey Lance is what he's measuring is, I can make a better paycheck being a 3rd or 4th quarterback in the NFL than a starting quarterback in the UFL. I think that's what Trey Lance is measured right now.
He may also be hoping, being in this system boosts him up a little bit, and we'll see. I was more interested in that as a landing spot. There were a lot of different places he could have gone that I thought would be less interesting, but we've seen Harbaugh make something out of some interesting quarterback prospects in the past. Number 4 for us, Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow, number 1 there. Jake Browning, a very serviceable and capable backup. We saw him fill in for Joe Burrow. It was either in 22 or 23, actually had a winning record. Didn't look too bad. Behind him, not a lot with Logan Woodside and Peyton Thorne, but Burrow, to me, a lot better than any of the 3 starting quarterbacks below him. Browning, a serviceable backup. That's enough to land them in the number 4 spot for me.
Yeah, Logan Woodside at 3, he's been in the league now he's going into his 7th or 8th year, and you don't stick around that long without having a little something. And so I think that gives them maybe a little bit of depth that, for instance, the Chargers, I don't think have with Lance and Ungalele. I got to be honest, I don't know who Peyton Thorne is. I know he's a college free agent because I'm looking at the depth chart, but I don't know from where. Yeah. But Joe Burrow is the real deal. And he's one of the, like, when he came into the league, he could run a bit and then he tore up the knee. And so he can't, but it doesn't matter when it comes to fantasy now. Joe Burrow is such a good passer, such a good decision maker, and has such a good stable of weapons around him that I think that helps when a guy like Jake Browning comes in, who played a fair amount in college, has some good experience coming into the league, maybe not the natural ability of a Joe Burrow, but he comes in and he did play well when he was subbing for Burrow. And I think that helped kind of carve out what his role is in Cincinnati. And as long as he doesn't get squirrely and ask for a whole lot of money, much like Davis Mills, I think Jake Browning can spend, the next 4, 5, 6 years being Joe Burrow's backup. But Burrow, I think there were 4 quarterbacks that scored more than 400 or more than 350 fantasy points last year. But they were guys like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And oddly enough, Baker Mayfield is probably more Burrow-esque. I forget who the 5th one was. But Burrow was, he did it on his passing. He didn't do it on running. Or Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen make up for it in running. Jaden Daniels was the 5th one. And so going through, I just did a draft for Pro Forecast magazine, it'll fantasy magazine, one of the longest running magazines out there. And I drafted from the 12th spot in a 1 QB standard league. And I took Burrow probably earlier than you might think in a standard league, but he was QB4 in standard scoring scoring 484 points based on his touchdown production. And he's got Higgins and Chase and Gesicki, Chase Brown, and they did a little work on that O-line. So I think, Burrow can carry a team. And, if it weren't for, the three teams above him, which have two very mobile quarterbacks and one with a great reputation, and, I may not, I might just as well have my number one team at number 4, but right now I got Burrow in the Cincinnati Bengals QB room there.
Yeah, so Browning, it was 2023. He started 7 games, went 4-3, threw for 1,936 yards, 12 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, completed 70% of his passes, which is pretty good. Logan Woodside has been with the Titans, Falcons, and Bengals. He has never thrown an NFL pass. He has carried the ball 14 times. So I'm guessing some of those are kneel downs, because one year shows 7 attempts for 10 yards and one shows 6 attempts for -6 and then 1 attempt for 6 yards. So never has thrown an NFL pass. Peyton Thorne was at Michigan State for 3 years from 2020 to 2022, and then spent the last 2 years at Auburn, has appeared in 53 games, 10,961 career college passing yards, 86 touchdowns, 43 interceptions. So if your theory about the number of college games holds, he might be a better number 3 than Logan Woodside. He was originally drafted by the Bengals, but never appeared for the Bengals, and then spent a couple of years with Mike Vrabel in Tennessee, and the last 3 years in Atlanta, where he was the number 3 or number 4 at times. So not a lot behind him. I'd still like Browning, but this one really probably about Joe Burrow. And I think our number 3 selection is really about the starter, but they definitely have a better room than Cincinnati cumulatively, and that's the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen, the number 1 there. They have a veteran in Mitch Trubisky, who is their backup. He was a backup there, went to the Steelers for a little while, came back last year, and remains a solid number 2 there. They have Shane Buechele, who originally, I think, was on the Chiefs before coming over, and then Mike White. So an interesting quarterback room. Again, a solid top 2 for me. That would be enough. Mike White, kind of an interesting development, or third option there, but the Buffalo Bills a pretty solid room there at number 3.
Yeah, it's awful hard to go against Josh Allen. It feels like they've got to start to try to give him, better receivers. They've got to try to take some of the running away to help conserve his health and keep him from getting injured. But again, he's kind of like the Derrick Henry of quarterbacks. He's 6'5", he's 250 pounds, good athlete, can run the ball. And he just puts up fantasy points, puts up yards. They throw the ball. It's not a selfish team when it comes to receivers. Did they sign, or they drafted somebody this offseason?
The Bills?
Yeah. Didn't they sign somebody?
Josh Palmer.
Josh Palmer.
Get too excited about.
Yeah, no, it's the Khalil Shakir show, and James Cook, Ray Davis will have a good year. Maybe we see Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman do something. But yeah, Josh Allen, again, one of those 350.
They signed Elijah Moore. I think that's what you're thinking of right after the draft.
Yeah. Made noise, but not news. He was one of those 5 quarterbacks that scored over 350 fantasy points. I think he was just over 400, if I remember correctly. But no, I like Josh Allen a lot. And in that standard league draft that I did, he he was the first quarterback taken, I believe.
So you and I have the same top two teams, but we have them in the inverse order. So those teams are the Baltimore Ravens, who have on their roster Lamar Jackson, Cooper Rush, and Devin Leary, and the Kansas City Chiefs, who have on their roster Patrick Mahomes, Gardner Minshew, Bailey Zappi, and Chris Oladokun. Uh, I have the Ravens as number one and the Chiefs as number two. And I'll be honest, it's pretty simple for me. When I was thinking about it, I think Lamar Jackson is a more dynamic player at this point than Patrick Mahomes. So I have him slightly ahead. And if I was being honest, I would prefer to have Cooper Rush as my backup than Gardner Minshew. And I think if you look at their career stats, especially the one that's most important about winning games, Gardner Minshew is a homeless man's Jameis Winston. It might be amusing at times, but you sure as hell better not be hoping that he's who you're depending on to win games. So that's why I separated them like that.
And I felt like Jackson and Mahomes were close enough that Gardner Minshew made up the difference over Cooper Rush. And I get where you're coming from with the, winning games. But I feel like Cooper Rush in Dallas has been in a substantially better situation in his career than Gardner Minshew in Jacksonville and Las Vegas / Oakland. I felt like I think Minshew is a little more dynamic. He's younger, maybe not a lot, but he's younger. And it just felt to me like when I looked at these two teams, which one did I think was going to come in and be able to win games for me in the style that the offense plays? I think Kansas City has done a lot to improve their wide receiver group. I think with Rice and Worthy and Hollywood Brown, and they drafted somebody this year, I forget. Oh yeah, and so they've got this group of wide receivers that's super dynamic. They still have Travis Kelce, who we see ceding ground to Noah Gray, but Gray is making plays. They brought in Rashard Smith to back up Isaiah Pacheco, who is a very, very good passing down back, and I think they got Kareem Hunt's back. But to me, it just feels like the passing game. They've looked around and said, if we're not going to have great running backs, we better get Patrick a good stable of receivers. They invested some in the O-line, and when it came down to Gardner Minshew and Cooper Rush, I feel like the Cooper Rush era is over. And I feel like he went to Baltimore, which doesn't necessarily, their offense is going to have to change when he goes in. And maybe it changes to just handing it off to Derrick Henry more. But that doesn't get me a whole lot at the quarterback position. If that's the case, just run Henry out of the Wildcat. But it isn't like there isn't miles between these two quarterback rooms. It's, we're splitting hairs here.
No, and for me, I don't disagree that they're close enough as starters. So if it would have been the other way around and Cooper Rush went to Kansas City and Gardner Minshew went to Baltimore, I probably would have flipped them. I still think Lamar is a little honestly, more dynamic as
I wouldn't have
a
flipped
runner and a receiver.
Because I don't think that Minshew fits the Baltimore offense any better than Cooper Rush does. So I would have probably flipped him in my rankings here if that were the case.
Yeah, to me it was the backup though, and I've seen enough from Gardner Minshew. all the people that seem to be excited. Honestly, if the Chiefs had retained Carson Wentz as their backup, I might have flipped them.
Yeah.
He just
Crazy. He hasn't been signed yet.
well, and I think it looked like he was in contention for some of those. Could be like the starter for a team that has nothing and didn't get those, and now. I mean, you would think we've looked at all the quarterback rooms now, especially in the NFC. There are plenty of places where he would be an upgrade over their number 2 option. Still plenty of places in the AFC where he would be an upgrade over their number 2 option, but have to see what they're holding out for, maybe injuries or whatnot.
No, I think what I always forget with Carson Wentz is that he's fixing to be 33 years old, I think, or 32 years old. He's older than
I mean, if Joe Flacco's kicking around and people are waiting to kick the tires with Aaron Rodgers, I don't think he's too old to be somebody's backup. I mean, would he be worse than having Jacoby Brissett as your backup? I mean, Brissett's 35, 36. Carson Wentz has been much more successful as a starter, and I'm not picking on Brissett, but like, what about New Orleans? Would it not help them, even if they want to look at these young guys, to have an actual,
veteran
option who
played
could,
in one games?
or if Tampa Bay fancies themselves as a contender, would you not rather have Carson Wentz behind Baker Mayfield than have to roll the dice with guys who've never played? Minnesota would have been an interesting place. I'm wondering if they didn't do that because they didn't want to put too much pressure on McCarthy. I think it's got to be somewhere where there's some security in the starter. Dallas would be another one. I think Milton's an interesting development prospect, but he's a development prospect.
Didn't you see that one game he played though?
I liked that one game, which is what makes him interesting to me as a development prospect. But or Jacksonville, where Trevor Lawrence has had some injuries. Miami, where you have a starter that's had some injuries. Would you but you think you have a decent team? I would have taken a shot. So he may get signed somewhere. New England. I'd rather have Carson Wentz than Josh Dobbs. I know Josh Dobbs is a Mike Vrabel type of player, but it's just me. If I'm trying to win games. If I was Josh McDaniels, I'd probably feel the same way. Although who knows if he has feelings. We are done now looking at quarterbacks. We did NFC and AFC. Next week we will be back on Monday again, and we will be looking at NFC running back rooms. We'll start with the bottom 8 running back rooms from the NFC. So turning over to the running back groups. It'll be interesting to see kind of how that shakes out. I'll just spoiler alert from my list. Not a good time to be in the NFC East unless you're an Eagle. Is how I was feeling looking at the rosters. But Dennis, if people have some free time this weekend and they're looking for something to fill that football-shaped hole in their lives, what can they do?
They can do what I do. Go to your favorite podcast platform, hit that search bar, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, give us a subscribe, give us a like, leave us a comment.
We will appreciate it. We'll be back on Monday. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Until then, take care.